The Bitcoin price suppression game might finally be over if you understand what the central bankers and some of the most powerful people around the world right now are positioning for. Earlier in the week, there was a really interesting meeting coming out of China when President Xi and, of course, India's President Modi, as well as Vladimir Putin, were all spotted together shaking hands at a very interesting time, because right now in the Bitcoin market, we're watching whales aggressively sell their Bitcoin. Now, I find this is fascinating because while whales are selling their Bitcoin, we just saw an indicator flip showing that central banks now hold more gold than US treasuries for the first time in about 30 years. And all of this is happening at the exact same time that gold is hitting record highs. And I think there are some interesting rumors that we need to cover when we're talking about Bitcoin and gold, because everybody knows that gold will typically rally first and it rallies the hardest. But when we look back throughout history, you'll see that typically what happens after gold rallies very hard and very aggressively first, well, Bitcoin tends to play catch up in a pretty aggressive fashion. I've got a ton of charts to cover with you guys today, but I think we might be watching the flip between a lot of the central banks and the biggest sovereign wealth funds and nation states beginning to dump gold and maybe buy Bitcoin. I don't want to speak too soon, but I do want to have a look at what the Vice President of America just recently said when he got asked about Bitcoin and how governments might look at store of values moving forward into the future.
Bitcoin are right. I happen to think that they're wrong. That will eventually win out in the marketplace. If the advocates of Bitcoin are right, and I happen to agree with them, if they make their case, that's eventually going to win out in the marketplace. What you shouldn't have is a dictatorial government that tells certain industries they're not allowed to do what they need to do. You've got to let people make these decisions on their own, and that's sort of been our approach. We want common sense regulatory regimes. We want to allow the cryptocurrency industry to participate in the mainstream of the economy. But then,
so again, I've got a little bit more from that clip that I do want to play for you guys. But don't you think it's interesting that he specifically mentions dictatorships at the same time that we're watching something really interesting happen when it comes to some of the largest dictatorships around the world? So, of course, America, the land of the free, so to say. Let's just say that America is the land of the free. They are welcoming and embracing Bitcoin right now at a time that I think is really interesting. We are watching some of the largest nation states of the G20, or the BRICS countries, I should say, rather, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. A few of their biggest leaders just recently met in China. Now, again, a lot of these countries, they're very pro-gold. China is rumored to have 20,000 metric tons of gold. Russia has the most amount of gold based upon the amount of reserves of the Russian ruble, or their national fiat currency, of any other country around the world. So Russia might only have, 1 or 2,000 metric tons of gold, but they don't have a lot of currency in circulation. They don't have a lot of debt. So, and of course, India has heritage and roots in the gold market for thousands of years. Most families actually save in gold in India today, and it is actually culturally, it's a very important, it's like a symbol, so to say. Like when people get married in India, it's very common to gift the newly wedded brides and groom gold. So of course, a lot of people store their wealth in gold. So I do think it's really interesting that we're now watching India, China, and Russia, all with very interesting ties to gold, meet in China at the same time that America looks to be accelerating its push into Bitcoin. So again, I think a lot of people are scratching their heads and they're asking themselves the question, why is the price of Bitcoin stuck at $120,000 or $112,000 a coin? You can see we have actually spent more than 100 days above $100,000 per coin, and a lot of people are kind of getting bored. But I think if you kind of zoom back, you can see a lot of similarities to what the Bitcoin price is doing. And again, I tell you guys, we are not a technical analysis channel. Who knows where the price of Bitcoin is going? But I do think it's interesting that Bitcoin has been moving up pretty aggressively, and then it's been kind of consolidating for a good 2 to 3 months. It's been moving up very aggressively, consolidating for a couple of months. Again, I would just encourage you guys, please do not sell your Bitcoin right now, because I think that some of the largest nation states in the world are making some really interesting moves that I think is going to fundamentally change traditional finance forever, because we are now watching markets officially break. We're watching correlations that have held true for 50 years no longer be true. We're now watching, as we can see here, the debt markets sell off in a historic fashion. We can see this chart is looking at the US dollar index. That is in blue. And then in the red, this is looking at long rates. And you can see these two metrics have not diverged this aggressively in years. Now, again, caveat, this chart only goes back to 2022, but you can see typically these two used to be somewhat correlated. They used to move in lockstep, but now we are watching a massive, massive, massive gap in between these two metrics. And what I think is interesting is, before I get into having a look at how aggressively I think Bitcoin is going to follow gold, I think gold is playing an important part as to why the long end of the yield curve is selling off so aggressively. So again, this chart is looking at what central banks hold. It's looking at, in the blue, this is US Treasuries. Again, this has been the savings account for central banks and governments of the entire world since the 1970s, since we got onto this petrodollar standard. And we can see that for the first time in about 30 years, since the mid-1990s, we can see that this yellow line has popped above the blue line. The yellow line is measuring gold holdings as a percentage of foreign reserves. So right now, what this chart means is that central banks hold more gold holdings than they do US Treasuries for the first time in a long time. This is huge. This is massive. Luke Groman always talks about the importance of this, but I find it fascinating that all of this is happening at the same time that we are watching gold absolutely rip and break out. If we check in and have a look at what gold is doing, we can see it has entered a historic rally. It has really started to enter price discovery mode. If I were to zoom out a little bit, put this on a weekly chart, all I'm going to say is that that's a pretty bullish chart. Gold has just been consolidating here for about 6 months since April 2025. And you can see very, very clearly that when gold consolidates and moves higher like this, this is, as the great Gazoo, I love that name in the chat says, this is the calm before the storm. So if gold is moving so aggressively, what does this mean for Bitcoin? I'm glad you asked. We have a couple of interesting charts I want to go through with you guys. We can see that this is looking at the correlation between the price of gold and the price of Bitcoin. Typically, what do you see? Gold moves first. It moves in a very interesting fashion. Gold's bull markets typically are a little bit more prolonged than Bitcoin's, but Bitcoin plays catch up really quickly, and you see a much higher beta or multiple on what Bitcoin does when it plays catch up to gold. So I think that's a really interesting thing to be aware of, because what gold's record-breaking run right now indicates is that Bitcoin is going to play catch up in a really, really big way. And I think that most people are unprepared for what the next 6 to 12 months might look like. Bruno Lira in the chat, and maybe they're buying half a Bitcoin today because of the last name, the Lira. Please, if you're holding Lira, you do not want to be holding Lira. You want to be holding Bitcoin. Please, Bruno, never disclose to people how much Bitcoin you're holding. Buying 0.5 Bitcoin today, that's a hell of a buy. That's a massive buy. Again, if you are buying a ton of Bitcoin today, I will always remind you, do not keep your Bitcoin on an exchange. You want to always put your Bitcoin into a hardware wallet. Please go and buy a hardware wallet. Doesn't matter what you buy, just get your hands on one, especially if you are like Bruno Lira, buying half a Bitcoin today. I will remind you guys, check out my channel partners. I think Trezor makes a great Bitcoin hardware wallet. They've got multiple different variations of the Trezor. As you can see, this thing is really compact. It's really nice. It is fully open source. You can go verify Trezor's code base if you want. They have multiple different options for you guys to get a hold of. And they're even going to give you 5% off a Trezor if you use a promo code Luke 5. So again, go and grab a Trezor. I think they're a great option. Another great option for you guys to check out is obviously Ledger. I think Ledgers are great. They're also very handy, and they are also running a big promotion right now. So if you guys missed the opportunity to get your hands on a Ledger a couple of weeks ago when they were running a promotion, now is your second chance to also go and get your hands on a hardware wallet and get your hands on some free Bitcoin. You can see if you buy a Ledger Stacks, you can get $80 of free Bitcoin. If you buy a Ledger Flex, which is what I'm holding right now, you can get $70 of free Bitcoin. So again, if you are like Bruno Lira buying half a Bitcoin today, go and get your hands on some hardware wallets, put your Bitcoin into your own self-custody. Now let's get into what is going on with this gold and Bitcoin correlation, because I find it really, really interesting and really, really fascinating that Bitcoin is about to play catch up, and it's going to do it in a pretty aggressive fashion, I believe. Again, I think this is charts like these that are breaking. This is a massive warning sign that the monetary system is changing. And again, what do I always tell you guys here on the channel? Time in the market always beats trying to time the market. This is the fundamentals of this channel. Do not time the market. Bitcoin's best 10 days is face melting. And if you miss Bitcoin's best 10 days every year, you could get absolutely wrecked. So what am I talking about? I want to show you what I'm talking about. There's a really cool chart that I always like to remind you of. It is this one right here. Missing Bitcoin's top 10 days a year could cost you all of your annual gains. What am I talking about? What do I mean? Let's break it down. Let's simplify it. So Bitcoin's best 10 days historically outperforms the other 355 days combined that you will see in the rest of the year. So that's what the purple bars are showing. The purple bars are Bitcoin's best 10 days. You can see every single year, they are collectively stronger and bigger than the other 355 days represented in these gray bars. So this is massive. This is really, really interesting, guys. I always tell you, please, please, please do not time the market. Be in the market. Keep it simple, stupid. Buy your Bitcoin. Hold your Bitcoin, because you never know when the price of Bitcoin is going to rip. And to William's comment, who is suppressing the price of Bitcoin, and why are they potentially suppressing the price of Bitcoin? Great question, might you add? Because if we do pay attention to what some of the biggest banks in the world right now are doing and positioning themselves for, I think we might get the answer to who is potentially suppressing the price of Bitcoin. Because I think there's a bigger game going on. This is what I'm trying to show you by looking at some of these charts and correlations that are breaking for the first time in 20 years. We're now starting to see central banks around the world say, hey, I prefer sound money. I prefer gold. I prefer, well, let's listen to what the Vice President of America prefers, JD Vance, because it sounds like he's actually more bullish on Bitcoin than gold.
You're back from Vegas. The crypto speech was a big hit. And I know a lot of smart people love crypto. I know some smart people actually have reservations about it.
Sure.
For our audience, can you just kind of make the case for crypto and people who have, concerns and quite frankly don't even understand it? There are a lot of folks out there. I know a lot of people own it, but
yeah, of course. So look, I'm an owner of Bitcoin here, but I'm also the Vice President of the United States. So
notice that he was asked about crypto and he diverted that very quickly and said, well, I own Bitcoin. That's a little bit of a signpost there, guys. Maybe the Vice President is onto something.
I want to be careful, but I think the core value proposition of cryptocurrency is that it's a way of transacting and a way of storing value in a modern digital age. Look, 100 years ago, if you wanted to go and buy something, you put a dollar bill on the table, you put a gold coin on the table. The value proposition of Bitcoin is that it can serve the same function, but in a digital age, a way that's secure, that's safer from fraud, that allows people to buy and sell and store value, but in a way that's consistent with the modern technological age that we live in. Now, having said that, I fully accept there are risks to all of these things. There are always risks to new technologies. Our approach in the Trump administration is to say, let people innovate. Let people figure this stuff out on their own.
And I think what's really interesting about innovation here is that I think Vice President JD Vance is saying the open part, he's saying the quiet part out loud. He's saying it's a digital age. Gold is old. Gold has failed. gold only represents $22 trillion of market cap today. That's like what? 2% of global assets? There's $900 trillion of money in the world and gold is 20 trillion, 2%. Gold's failed. Gold used to be 100% of money, no longer, okay? Over 100 years, gold has failed. And I think JD Vance is saying the quiet parts out loud. He's saying, let people innovate. We're in the digital age. Bitcoin is the digital store of value for the digital age. And I think, as we can see, Bitcoin typically lags gold by about 30 days. And I mean, hey, like I'll continually tell you guys on this channel, we're not about technical analysis. But hey, I think that's an interesting pattern. Bitcoin looks as if it might be about to play catch up, especially when we consider what some of the largest banks around the world right now are doing and making moves into the Bitcoin space. Because today it's not only $1.7 trillion giants like Morgan Stanley quietly increasing their Bitcoin position like we saw earlier this week. We also have longtime Bitcoin critics like the IMF now coming out and classifying Bitcoin as a capital asset. If that makes you really scratch your head, so will headlines like this. We can see $219 million this week flowed into Bitcoin ETFs as institutions, quote unquote, are quietly preparing for a run to $1 million Bitcoin. So today I want to be exploring, does what the big banks are doing and suggesting confirm that maybe Bitcoin is on a path to $1 million Bitcoin much quicker than most people think? Now, I know that's a big number. We're only at $100,000 today. A lot of people are probably thinking, Luke, let us get over 150 before you start talking about $1 million Bitcoin. But what I just want to remind you guys about is when Bitcoin moves, it moves aggressively. Do not forget what happened in 2017. Bitcoin rallied from $1,000 to $20,000 in 9 months. Do I think that we're going to 20x again today in 2025 and move from 100,000 to 2 million in 9 months? I don't know, but what I will say is that most people, I think, are dramatically underweighting the probability of that happening, especially when we start to consider the big banks in this bull run have their bags packed. They're buying Bitcoin. They've been buying Bitcoin for a long time. Let's have a look at this news headline here. As we can see, $3 trillion giant Goldman Sachs just bought even more Bitcoin last quarter. We've got the IMF, one of Bitcoin's biggest haters. Again, do not underweight the significance of this, flipping bullish on Bitcoin, calling it a capital asset. And we've got ETF inflows continually increasing week after week. And what I think is fascinating is there's a narrative that Bitcoin's topped, but if you look at the data, that's not true. This is a really cool website. I love it. This looks at 30 different Bitcoin bull market peak indicators. And if you have a look at this column here, you can see it's hit or not. And a little red cross means that Bitcoin has not hit the bull market peak indicator for any of these 30 indicators. There's a lot of bearish sentiment in the space right now. There's a lot of these traders who every 10% correction, they'll come out and they'll write a new article saying, oh, look, I don't think it's likely that Bitcoin's topped, but let me write an article looking at, you know, the potential for maybe why Bitcoin has topped. I'm not going to name names, but what I'm just going to continually say to you guys is, look, Bitcoin's at $100,000 right now. I personally do not think that the bull market is over. I think we're seeing sentiments that some of your analysts and experts in the space are looking down and they're saying, oh, look, maybe the price is, you know, I'm bullish, but I'm also bearish. I think right now when you're seeing the a lot of skepticism in the space, this is the time to be bullish and just remind yourself why you hold Bitcoin. You hold Bitcoin because people like the IMF cannot control Bitcoin and they cannot stop Bitcoin. And even though they've been attacking countries like El Salvador and even Pakistan who want to use excess energy to mine Bitcoin, the IMF's coming out attacking them publicly, but privately they're writing little papers like this saying, yeah, you know what? Bitcoin's a capital asset. Why? Ask yourself, why now? I think that's interesting. Some more data that I found interesting this week was long liquidations. We just saw one of the highest spikes of long liquidations in a very long time. And you can see a lot of shorts were liquidated recently as well. I do think that's interesting. And typically you see the price kind of whipsawed around before it really breaks out and decides in what direction it is going to go. So again, I would just encourage you, please do not leverage trade your Bitcoin. Let's keep it really simple here, guys. Please do not be like Barney the boy. I saw this tweet on Twitter recirculating, and it's captioned, "Entire Coinbase account frozen with funds in it till I answer these questions." What the F? Poor guy. He got absolutely rug pulled. Coinbase is saying we're going to need you to answer about 4,000 words of an essay, and you can't not give us that information and expect us to give you your Bitcoin. So again, just yet another reminder. Come on, guys, be very careful. Don't keep all your Bitcoin on exchange. This is why I always tell you to hold your own Bitcoin so you've actually got custody over it. Because at the end of the day, if you don't hold your own Bitcoin, if you don't have custody over your Bitcoin, you're going to end up like the poor chaps who had BitConnect. Great comment, great gazoo. Because I think right now, the fact that the banks are getting into Bitcoin so aggressively, I think this is some signal. This is some signal that there's some seriously big players in the market right now who I think are contributing to the most parabolic chart in Bitcoin. I'm not talking about the price. I'm talking about the coins on exchanges. Look at how this is dropping like an absolute rock. I show you this nearly every live stream because every live stream I'm shocked at how aggressively this thing is dropping. Again, since October, we've seen about 600,000 Bitcoin leave the exchanges. It's huge. It's about 70 to 80,000 coins a month. Again, who is buying this Bitcoin? Who is quietly accumulating this Bitcoin? I think it's some of the largest banks around the world, like Morgan Stanley, $1.7 trillion giant. Goldman Sachs, also a multi-trillion dollar giant. And again, we've got some of the largest BRICS nations around the world holding meetings in China. Let's not forget the BRICS nations are heavily, heavily bullish on sound money. I think it's kind of poetic that we're watching gold rip and break out to new all-time highs at the time of recording. Some people are saying, hang on a minute, what are the whales doing? Speaking of the whales, I flashed this chart earlier, but I want to break it down for you because I've been seeing some people saying, okay, whales are selling. This is bearish. Well, let's just break it down. We can see the average holdings for entities with 100 all the way up to 10,000 Bitcoin just dropped to 488 coins, the lowest since 2018. Bitcoin Archive captioned this by saying, once whales finish taking profits, the melt up can resume. Again, I don't know how to feel about this data, but I did see this data. I know a lot of people right now are asking themselves the question, who is suppressing the price of Bitcoin? Why are we stuck at $108,000? Look, I just think we are seeing a lot of selling in the market that I think could be contributing to what we're actually seeing here. I got a lot of people are saying, why is Bitcoin stuck at $106,000 per coin? Is it paper Bitcoin? It could be. Again, my hunch and suspicion here is that exchanges are rehypothecating their Bitcoin, which is why I always tell you, do not trust an exchange. But there's also some good arguments here for maybe why the price of Bitcoin has been a little bit soft over the past 6 months. Whales are selling their Bitcoin. It's an interesting take. I think Smiling Snow Squirrel here, that's a great name as well, by the way. They also have an interesting take here. Just buy some Bitcoin, borrow against the Bitcoin, and then be happy. Again, if you are thinking about selling your Bitcoin this bull run, I always remind you, you don't have to sell your Bitcoin. You can actually borrow against your Bitcoin. I think if you are going to borrow against your Bitcoin and get a Bitcoin backed loan, I think Firefish is the best company to do this with. They don't take custody of your Bitcoin. That's why I love Firefish. They use multi-signature vaults. where your Bitcoin sits in escrow and you hold a key to that multi-signature vault, okay? It's a Bitcoin peer-to-peer lending product. As you can see, I've used them to take a couple of loans myself. I've gone and verified the product. I love the product. I think it's great. A ton of you guys have also used the product and reached out and said it's a great one. So if you do want to go out there and get a loan, you can get a 6-month loan, a 12-month loan. You can get a 2-year loan. I'm actually going to be using it to buy my first house this year, and I won't be selling my Bitcoin to do it. So if you do want to check out how I'm doing that, I'm doing it via Firefish, and they're even going to give you 30% off the fees on your first transaction if you use a promo code Luke. So make sure you sign up to Firefish down below if you also want to never sell your Bitcoin. Because again, this is what Donald Trump is saying. Donald Trump is saying never sell your Bitcoin. Now we're watching BRICS nations collectively get together. I don't want to say panic, but they are holding meetings in China. And I do think it's really interesting that we're now starting to see Modi and President Xi change a little bit. Again, historically, China and India hasn't necessarily been the biggest allies, so to say. But maybe now desperate times call for desperate measures. Just a question, just a speculation. I do think that both countries absolutely love their gold, and we're watching gold rip right now. I think that's a little bit of signal. I think that's a little bit of signal amongst the noise. I've seen a lot of people talk about gold and, short-term, price breakouts and things like that. And it's cool and it's interesting, but I just encourage you guys to zoom out. I think we're very early in this global liquidity cycle beginning to expand. As you can see, we're now beginning to see this blue line on this chart just start to tick up a little bit. This is the year-on-year growth rate of the global money supply. And have a look at how much this thing expanded during the 2020-2021 Bitcoin bull run. It spiked aggressively. Are we anywhere near those levels? No. This is why I'm bullish over the next 6 to 12 months. The global money supply looks as if it's going to be expanded at a pretty aggressive rate. We've got Donald Trump trying to push out Jerome Powell as chairman of the Federal Reserve right now as we speak. And what's this going to mean? Lower interest rates. What the hell is Bitcoin going to do with lower interest rates, considering it's at $110,000 per coin and interest rates are historically high? They've been high if you're comparing interest rates over the past 20 years. I don't think 5% interest rates are high when you look back on a 5,000-year time horizon. But on a 20-year time horizon, comparatively, they're high. And a lot of the experts said that Bitcoin, it's just a speculative asset. It's just a high beta tech stock that is a low interest rate environment phenomena. A lot of these experts were saying the only reason Bitcoin's at 100K is because of low interest rates. And when the Fed raised interest rates in 2021, it permanently killed Bitcoin. Well, guess what? We're back at $120,000 a coin, and the experts were once again wrong. So this is another reminder, never trust the experts, whether we're talking about Bitcoin or whether we're actually talking about other subjects. Speaking of other subjects, I will remind you that financial sovereignty is great. Having your own money is great. But I'm just as interested in geographical sovereignty. Traveling the world, getting another passport, setting up a tax residency in another country so you can give your local IRS or tax accounting people the middle finger and just legally lower your taxes. And again, I talk about all of that and more on my brand new digital nomading YouTube channel. I also do Bitcoin challenges. So we did travel to Costa Rica, tried to survive on Bitcoin for 72 hours. But today I released a video talking about the 5 things I wish I knew about Colombia before living there on 3 separate occasions since 2022. So if you do want to check out that video, highly encourage you guys, go check that out and give the new channel some love. Support it, follow along. There's going to be some interesting videos dropped over there. So make sure you subscribe to that channel. If you're interested in my crazy global shenanigans, I dropped a link to that video in the live stream chat for you guys. And there's also a link down below to that new video. So with all that said, thank you so much to the 500 odd of you guys tuning in on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm going to end this stream here. Thank you so much, everyone who tuned in. If you want some more Bitcoin content, I'm going to put some links to some recent videos somewhere around there. And with that said, I'll see you all in the next one.